So, welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Playbook podcast. And we are continuing our preview of the women's Euros. We're doing it with a twist. We're focusing a little more on the off the pitch activity compared to on the pitch activity. But although in this particular episode, we will have a little shade towards on the pitch activity. So, we have with us we're doing the Italy squad, by the way. And we have with us three very familiar voices from the Total Italian Football podcast. Conor Clancy, Mia Claydon, and Euan Burns. So together they bring a lot of curious insight. They pioneer women's football storytelling, and they have a deep women's Serie A analysis. So they are a very good resource for us to go for in this case. So I think the first question which comes to mind for anyone is, you three clearly are not from Italy. So what first attracted you to Italian football? And how did your interest evolve into covering the women's game in particular?
I'll jump in with that one first. My interest in Italian football started basically because of Zlatan Ibrahimovic years and years and years ago. So I used to watch Milan every week for him. And then I started writing about it and I came over, and then I kind of decided quickly that I wanted to move here. And again, my interest in the women's game was piqued by a footballer because Stephanie Roach, who was like a Puskas nominated Irish international, came out to play with Florentia and Florence, and then a couple of years later, Louise Quinn, like an absolute pillar of the national team, came out to play for Fiorentina. And I interviewed both of them while they were here, but it was when Quinn was here, probably during the pandemic as well, I think it was like 2020, that I really got into it and I started following her progress every week. And since then, I just kind of found a lot of the little stories, a lot of the little characters that were popping around the league to be really interesting, and it grabbed me in. And I grew up with League of Ireland football, like a season ticket holder at my local team, Bray Wanderers, my whole life. And what I liked about the League of Ireland, and still do, is that it felt real. Like the people who play the game feel like they're normal people, whereas with men's professional football, a lot of the time you don't get that. And when I was going to women's football here in Italy, I found a lot of parallels with the women's or with the men's game in Ireland. So I kind of just got sucked in that way.
Yeah, I mean, mine is kind of a bit more recent, and I watched a bit of the national team during the 2019 World Cup in France, but it wasn't ever really on my radar until 2023. And I decided I'll go to Rome. I always wanted to go to Italy. I'll go to Rome and I will go and watch Roma versus Barcelona in the Champions League. I think it was a quarter-final. And from that moment, everything changed for me. It was like, this is the big... I think the final score was 1-0 to Barcelona, but just narrowly. And I was like, why isn't anyone talking about this? This is such a massive day and a massive occasion. I think there was 40,000 fans in the stadium. It was massive, massive day for women's football in Italy. And no one was talking about it here in England. So that it piqued my interest from there. And all of a sudden I'm here on a podcast with these two. And yeah, that was kind of it.
With these two?
Yeah, you know who you are.
That's a bit insulting. You're leaving out the detail as well that you followed me to Rome, because I was at that game, and then a year later I was at Italy against Ireland in Florence, and you also followed me to that stadium without knowing me, which was creepy.
Not true. You followed me to both of those places.
Yeah, because out of the two of us, you were the one that was always going to be at those games, right?
Yes, thank you. Next, please, Euan, please.
My answer is probably less romantic in the sense that in terms of the men's side of Italian football, that developed when being very young. It was more generally about European football, like, especially if you grow up mostly in England. Obviously, the Premier League is so ginormous that it just is so all-encompassing that if you like any other European football with any depth at all, it becomes sort of your thing. You get very much plastered with it. You're the person who knows about other leagues. And then as time went by, especially coinciding with when I sort of started traveling like without my parents, Italy was where I kept going, and it sort of just became the league that I was far more interested in. In terms of the women's coverage, I feel like the really realistic answer is that Conor and I were part of what is now Total Italian Football, but was previously something else. And he was obviously living in Italy and had developed an interest in the women's side of Italian football as well. And he basically came to me and said, we should be covering this. Would you like to help? So it kind of started more as like, well, yeah, we should be doing that because we're covering Italian football. So this is part of Italian football, so we should be doing it. But obviously that was now 4 years ago, maybe.
That was 2021, because I remember I was back home in Ireland for a couple of months at that time.
Yeah. But so obviously it sort of, in some ways for me, it kind of started as a sense of duty, if you like, where it was like, well, yeah, of course we should be doing that. But now it's an actual interest. It's not a duty anymore. It's obviously very quickly develops into an interest because the league is fascinating. And like Conor says, that there is a level of access that you don't get with the men's game, which sort of makes you want more, essentially.
Yeah, like I mean, I've always noticed that England or the Britain in general has a very curious relationship with Italy in general. If you notice, like in the men's Italian football side, James Richardson, who's such a legend in the football broadcasting world, by the way, he was like a big trailblazer in the 90s. He brought Italian football to British shores. So I would say that you guys are probably the James Richardsons of Italian football, Italian women's football. You could say by that perspective.
Well, I was insulted at the start of the season because last summer I took the decision to shave my head. And obviously, a bald man with a beard covering Italian football, the first thing that was said to me on the first podcast by Kev Pugzelski, the other co-host, was, "Oh, are you trying to be James Richardson now?" So yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So Sai?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about how all three of you had very different entry points into the women's game, especially Italian women's football. So, do you think? I'm pretty sure the three of you might have immediately spoken to each other, or you might have been present together. I'm not sure when the women secured their qualification for the 2025 the Euros, and obviously the Italian team qualifying for a major tournament is not as much as a story as it is for, say, Portugal or Poland in this case. So what sort of reaction did you have to Italy qualifying for this tournament, and what are your expectations for them?
I remember I was actually at home in Ireland because it happened on my mum's birthday. And I always go home for my mum's birthday every year. And I remember we were going out for dinner and I was watching the match, trying to get as many minutes of the match in before we went out for dinner. They beat Finland 4-0, I think it was, to get the job done. My memory is that Chiara Beccari scored early enough, and it was kind of clear by that point that Italy were going through. So it was good, but the reaction beyond our reaction, I didn't know Mia at this point either, so it would have just been Euan and I talking. But the reaction in Italy would have been minimal, because I'm sure we'll get onto it a little bit later with some of the questions that are to come. But the coverage of women's football here in Italy it's a strong word to say, but it's embarrassingly bad, like in the fact that it just doesn't exist. So it's disappointing from that regard. It's much bigger in in English speaking countries, unfortunately. But Mia Burnsy wants to jump in and save me, thankfully.
I was going to wait till you finished, but no, I think you actually kind of hit the nail on the head, because I think we are at a point now where, which is a positive thing, that Italy qualifying for the Euros wasn't a ginormous story. They are still at a point where it wouldn't take a massive amount to go wrong for them to not qualify for a major tournament. But we are now in a position, especially with tournaments expanding, which I know we'll talk about a bit later, where it's not quite a huge historic moment necessarily that they did qualify, which is overall a positive thing, really.
Yeah, just to finish off, I think the group that they were in to qualify and the games that they had to play to qualify were tough, and especially when I looked at that first, and they had to beat the Netherlands, Finland, and Norway. They're tough games. Norway and the Netherlands are two very, very, very good footballing countries in terms of women's football, and I was worried, but they they did so well. And I think they blew everyone's expectations, including mine, who backed them, just completely out of the water, because I think they only lost one game, and I think that was to Finland, and they should have beat them anyway. I think they drew twice. They drew to Norway, they drew to Netherlands, and it was all just very impressive given the squads that the other teams had. So it really kind of put them on the map a little bit more. I think people start to respect them a little bit more, but it doesn't mean that I'm particularly confident that they're going to do fantastically well at the actual tournament. I hope they do, but go on, Connor.
It was the games with the Netherlands, really, wasn't it, where we thought these are going to make or break it, because we all thought, look, Norway are on a different level. Netherlands are in theory much better, but Italy had been playing quite well under Son Shin, and we didn't really know what we were expecting from Italy. And I take that, but Finland are okay. But look, if Ireland played Finland, I'd be disappointed if Ireland didn't get the job done. So Italy should definitely be getting the job done against them. But yeah, on the rest of it, I can't disagree. And what Euan said is important, and Mia was getting there as well before I rudely interrupted her. That when Italy go to tournaments, they tend to not show up in recent years. So qualifying is one thing, but we saw it in the last, because there were back-to-back tournaments. 2023 was the World Cup, and then 2022 was the Euros. Italy were absolutely embarrassing in both of those competitions. So qualifying is one thing, but I think the three of us are going into this summer with more optimism than we did in 2023 because of the coaching change. But we all have that little bit of nervousness and that slight fear that Italy are going to get to the big stage and just not perform again. And I think we're all a bit worried about that.
I think one observation which came to mind now, if you notice the 4 teams which came from this particular qualifying group, all of them are in the Euros. So it is a pretty tough qualifying group if you can have like as much as 4 teams coming from the same qualifying group to be in the main draw. So I think probably they're in good stead. I don't know, like I'm just guessing, because like maybe that would have toughened them up more. But based on your experiences in the past, I don't want to be too. Sai, anything of that?
Yeah, no, I don't.
So looking at the 2025 Euros roster, how would you assess the balance which the coach has gotten between experience and youth in the current Azzurre squad? And what are the positional areas that stand out as strong or particularly weak, if you can talk about it?
I think there's to me, there's a fairly clear area in the squad that is not as strong as others, which is the defence. Because you look at the strikers and it's not that easy to pick who you'd want to start. You can make a case for plenty of the players. If you look at the most recent squad, obviously we don't have the actual Euro squad yet, but the most recent one, the list of forwards, you can make a case for lots of them to start a game. You could say the same in the midfield, and there's also some names missing for injury there as well who would be in the conversation. The defence, less so. I think it's more a case of, well, yeah, you could have that player, but, it doesn't excite me. Maybe I'll have that one instead. Whereas, going into a tournament, you want to be quite clear on who your starting 11 is. It's always been a thing in all football of you go into a tournament, and one of the main criticisms you can always give a coach is, they don't know their best 11. And it always causes a really mixed up group stage, and it can catch a lot of teams out. And I personally don't think Son Shin is really close. If you look at the most recent, basically all of his games since he took charge, if you give him the first 5 or 6 games as figuring out his team, even after that, it changes very, very regularly. So I think I know you've got us on for insight, but I think we're all relatively clueless as to who he'd actually start when the first game comes around.
It becomes a bit of a joke with us on the podcast, doesn't it? That like when he names a squad, you've no idea what he's going to do, because I think we all looked at this recent squad announcement and we're all disappointed with some of the names that aren't in there. Like, if we let Mia speak in a second, she'll probably burst into tears because Nadine Nischler is not in the squad. But she's got a point. Like, Nischler should definitely be there, and then there are other players, one of whom I'm not going to name because of my background, and I might get in trouble if I say it on air somewhere, but one of the names on the list just absolutely shouldn't be there, and it's another player that Mia loves. But actually, you could extend that out to two, because they haven't played much. One of them just hasn't really kicked the ball at all, but they're there. Mia, I don't know if you want to fill in the blanks and maybe talk about the players that I'm referring to.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's worth to note that a lot of players in the Italy squad have been injured, and a lot of leaders, a lot of players that WSL fans will know. Aurora Galli, she's just come back from an ACL injury. She's played probably 10 minutes since her injury in September, and she had a call up over, I'm going to say it, Nadine Nischler, who's had a fantastic season. And I could talk for hours about her, and I probably would, but I won't. We've also got Martina Rizzucci, who again has come back from an ACL injury, is getting a bit older, probably shouldn't be there, but again, she is a good defensive option. And when we're talking about the fact that the defence is quite fragile in Italy, and there's not too many options, that's probably that reason. It all just seems a little bit weird, and as Conor said, you don't really ever know what Sonchin's going to do, and it can make for very frustrating watching, especially when there's a lot of young players. It seems like he doesn't necessarily always trust younger players, which is fair enough, but I think there's a lot of experienced players in the Italy squad that could nurture those players, and especially when we've got Euros coming up, and those players could definitely make a difference. Alice Corelli, a big player I talk about as well, who has been great at Roma this season. Giorgio Aragoni, who's again has been fantastic for AC Milan this season. They're players that are young, they're probably 19, 20, 21, but they just aren't seeing any senior squad call-ups because maybe they are too young, maybe they are too inexperienced. So the squad is interesting, and I think the positive for Italy fans is that there is a long list of fantastic future players coming through the ranks, and that's absolutely something that they can hold on to. But it doesn't mean a lot right now when they're not being called up, annoyingly.
That is a concern for me, because a lot of the players who I'm not happy about the inclusions of are players who are on the wrong side of the peaks of their career. Like, Cecilia Salvai is there. She's there for experience. She hasn't played much. Martina Rizzucci is there. It must just be for experience. And then, as Mia mentioned as well, Aurora Galli in midfield. Like, I really like her as a character. I think she brings a lot to any group, but I feel bad for the likes of, as Mia said, Nischler and Aragoni, who, I mean, she's directly taking their places, right? And of course, Giulia Dragoni and Giada Greggi are both out, and they've been out for a while now. They're huge losses to the team. But there's someone at the back who I would love to have seen called up, and it's Federica Daria, who on loan at Lazio from Juve this season. She's been one of the best defenders in the league from start to finish. Again, I think her age was probably just used against her in not calling her up, and it does come as a bit of a concern to me, because you see players, again, it feels like I'm just attacking someone here, but Flaminia Simonetti, is she really one of the standout players at Lazio this season? Does she really belong in that squad? I'm not convinced. I'd probably take Aragoni over her as well, because Aragoni came through as a striker because of necessity at Parma 3 years ago. She ended up playing as a fullback and establishing herself as an amazing fullback. And then at Milan this year, she's been playing in central midfield. So she can play absolutely anywhere. Like, give her a pair of gloves and she could probably do a job in goal as well, based on what we've seen. So I really wish she was going. And Nischler is another one who just should be in the team. Like, probably about 6 weeks ago now, 2 months ago, we were starting to doubt whether Nischler was doing enough to get into the Euro squad. But then basically, since we had that conversation, she's been the best Italian player in the league. And then the squad comes around, she's not in it. So again, Sonchin's a bit confusing, and you don't really know what to expect from him. But I am disappointed by his squad.
The other sort of looking further forward, it does feel like Sunshine has shown quite a lot of loyalty to some of those older players. And if we assume that this squad is not too dissimilar to what is eventually chosen, it'd be very odd if he suddenly took out about 8 players from that squad and replaced them with much younger ones. If he's still in the job, he's going to come to a point in about a year where he might have a lot of players that he trusts that are suddenly retiring or like too blatantly not at the level to play for Italy anymore. And he's going to have this huge turnover. And obviously, as we're saying, we think there are plenty of young players that can take the places of those people. But it's a lot of turnover all at once.
Burnsy, I'm going to ask you this, right? Because it's just come into my mind looking at some of the players that are on that list and you talking about how he's stuck with players who have been around before, even before him. Had Saragama not retired, do you reckon she'd have been in this squad? Because it wouldn't have shocked me. And it would have been outrageous, but it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if that were to be the case.
It would have been near scandalous.
Well, some of them are, though.
Yeah. I mean, she literally played... I know that there was the symbolic nature of the number 3 for her shirt number for that last Juve game, but like, you know, they didn't do 33, did they? Because it wasn't going to happen from a physical standpoint. It had to be 3. But yeah, I know what you mean. There are some names where you think that it feels a bit like cheerleaders almost, which sometimes you do see with one player, but it feels a bit more widespread.
The only hope I have is that, look, this isn't the final squad. This is very much the squad for the games against, reminding me of Sweden and Wales. So there might still be changes between now and the summer. And given how readily Sunshine does change things, it wouldn't be a shock if 8 of the players in that squad were changed for someone else by the time July rolls around.
I think from what you told, he sounds like a bit of a tinkerman, to use like a big time tinkerman. Like I don't know. I was just looking through his CV right now, like Sanchin's CV. Like I think this is his first ever role in a women's football team, right, in his career. So is that a factor also that he has so many blind spots? Could that be a factor?
It seems like it, to be honest, because when he got the job, it seemed scandalous because he was effectively a nobody who just got the biggest job in Italian women's football like that. But then he beat Spain, he beat Sweden. The results were amazing. And he had this way of whatever players he called up, he got stuff out of them that Milena Bertolini before him was never able to get. So he's frustrating because he does make a lot of decisions that make you think, well, you can't be watching the same things as us, because how is that defender in the team? And how is this midfielder not in the team? But the results are speaking for him. So he can point to his track record in Italy as Italy coach and say, well, I clearly know what I'm doing, even if the squad is absolutely bizarre every single time. And I have to emphasize, it is every time. Every international break we've had since Sunshine's been in charge, there have been at least 3 players in the squad where we've thought, how the hell are they there? And then there's probably been twice as many in each squad where we've thought, what are they doing to not get into it? So it's odd, but I ultimately feel like every time there's a Italy squad named under Sunshine, we spend half an hour talking about it. And then at the end of the half hour, we say, it's all pointless talking about it because we know he's going to get something good out of them anyway, even though it doesn't make sense. So we're in a weird position with it by now.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, his style of choosing players for each international break is a little erratic, and my guess is as good as yours that he might change up his squad for the Euros as well. Also, considering that right now their run of games in the Nations League, they've got a really good chance of topping the group with Sweden up next and just being 2 points behind them. And in the Euros, I'd like to say they have a relatively easier path to the knockouts, given that Spain might be the only challenge in that group. I know Wales are coming up right now, but they're still debutants. And Belgium, I think they're almost on the same boat as Italy are. They're very erratic when it comes to major tournaments as well. So that game could go either way. So Italy actually does look like this time they could have a good path to the knockouts. So
the problem with that is that was also true at the World Cup. Like, they were in a group with, okay, Sweden, an incredible team, but then there was Argentina and South Africa, and they beat Argentina in the first game. You thought, right, job done, they're going to get through. And then the Sweden game was so humiliating that it killed them. It absolutely killed them, and they ended up blowing it against South Africa on the last day. Burns, and I think we had been together for the Sweden game in Portsmouth, and then the South Africa game happened just as we were leaving, and I was watching it on a bus early enough in the morning, and I could not believe what was happening. So I'd almost be more confident if Italy were going into a group with 3 amazing teams, because when they play Spain, when they play Sweden, under Sonjin, they've shown themselves able to get results. It's when they play teams that you think, okay, yeah, you should probably get a result here. That's when things are concerning for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is also a good point.
Yeah, like I think they follow, like Italy in general, both the men's and women's teams, they're very unpredictable teams. Like they always get out in the group stage in major tournaments, like at least in recent times. So when you expect them to do well, so I think they have that in common. So that equality is there, I think, from that perspective. Yeah, like I think let's go to something which is off the pitch. So there will be a lot of we hope that there will be a lot of viewership. So during these Euros, so during the 2022 Euros and the 2023 World Cup, there was a spike in the TV viewership. So what role do these traditional broadcasters have in shifting attitudes towards the women's game?
It's slightly harder for Mia and I, at least, to say what's happening within Italy, but I mean, I certainly know from a distance that attitudes are not being shifted towards it as well as could be done, which is something that you could say for almost anywhere in the world. It's of course it's better than it has been. Pretty much every time it's better than it has been, and the general trajectory is right. But we can often sit there and go, well, if you did this, it'd be better. And it's usually something fairly simple, and it doesn't get done. But yeah, I mean, as Conor kind of mentioned earlier, that there isn't much of a footprint for the Italian women's team, for the national team in the country. So things like when they qualified, it's not exactly a street party situation. Regardless of whether it's like a shock that they've qualified or anything, even if they'd never qualified before ever, and this was the first time, you wouldn't see much going on the streets, and you wouldn't see a huge amount of it on telly either.
I think 2 things that are one's happening at the moment, and one has just happened, that sum up the lack of publicity and broadcasting of women's football here. Is 2 weeks ago now, last week, I can't remember, very recently, there was the Women's Cup final in Como, and it was between Juventus and Roma, which has basically become Italian women's answer to the men's Classico in Spain, because it's become such a huge game. Every time they play each other, it's mad. Anybody can beat anybody. Even when Roma are terrible, they can beat Juventus. When Juventus are terrible, they can beat Roma. And they were playing each other in a cup final, which was huge for both teams, because if Juventus won, they were very much back. They won the double. And if Roma won, they saved a dreadful season. I was in Como the day before the game and for the whole weekend, and I didn't see a single poster publicizing the match taking place there. In the end, there was a record-breaking crowd of 7,000, which was a shock to me. And as you said earlier, I live in Parma, and the women's national team play here in like 3 days. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The only people that I know who know because I've told them that it's happening, and everybody's shocked. And I'm walking around the city the last few days, and I don't see anything about it. I didn't see when it was announced that it was going to be here, and I'm a women's football journalist in Italy. So the things that they're just not promoted in the right way. The broadcasting is one thing. The games will be on Rai, which means there's the potential for eyes, there's the potential for an audience, but I don't trust anybody enough to actually publicize the fact that the games will be available on Rai. They just are, and I know they are because they always are. But that's not how you get something to grow. That's something you can get away with when something already has a big backing. But it's growing, but I feel like things are improving and growing here because of basically Italian teenage girls being interested in football, and because they speak English better than the generations before them, they're able to follow women's football abroad because it's all coming from English speaking places, so that they're able to absorb it and then apply that to things here. Like when I go to games, to be fair, there is a mix in crowds, but you do notice the number of Italian teenage girls that are at games here compared to going to men's games. Like it is a bigger proportion. So it's going slowly, and I don't trust that it's going to be a very positive summer for numbers, unfortunately, especially if Italy have a bad tournament.
I think. Do you think if Italy does get to host the 29 Euros, which they've bid for, and right now there is no obvious answer to who might host that one. But do you think if they do get the hosting rights, there might be a change in the way the local media or the FA approaches exposure?
I would hope so. And to give the federation their credit, with the cup final in the last few years, they've taken it to where they've taken it to Cesena, they've taken the Super Cup to Spezia, they've taken the cup final to Salerno. So they're moving it around with the intention of taking it to places where the national team don't play and taking it to places that have never held an event before. So they do try and tap into new audiences, but in a way that just I don't think works, because they don't promote it. You can take it somewhere, but if nobody knows that it's happening, it's very hard to get new audiences. What I would be hopeful for, though, if there was a tournament here, in terms of fans traveling to Italy, Italy is one of the easiest destinations in the world to sell to people. So people want to come to Italy regardless. If there's a football tournament on here, people want to come. The romanticism of the men's 1990 World Cup as well. It's known as being one of the best ever World Cups purely because of vibes and aesthetics, really. So a lot of people would come. And then when there's a lot of people in places like Parma, Cesena, it's hard not to notice that. If the games are in Florence and Rome, people won't notice the extra people. But in the other cities, people be like, why are there all these football fans here in July? Because there's not a football tournament on. And like, oh, there's a women's football tournament on. Okay. And that might get people's awareness up. I don't have trust in Italian TV companies, etc., to publicize it properly. But just as like a knock-on effect of there being a lot of people in slightly different places, I think it might have a positive effect.
I mean, you wanted to say something, Mia? Sorry if I cut you off.
No, I was no. Connor's done it all perfectly. It's all good.
That's strange, because usually you disagree with everything I say, so I was waiting for you to cut me off.
I don't ever do that.
Yeah. The point I think which I want to draw, I think sport in general sometimes is a mirror of society as well, right? So sometimes I think the Italian society is a little more patriarchal also, like a little more. That could also be a reflection of why the coverage is so low. I may be wrong, but that could be the case, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. It's a really hard balance to strike, though, and it's hard to define Italian culture, because in some aspects it is very patriarchal, but then in other aspects, women have a respect in a lot of elements of Italian society that I've never seen them have in elements of Irish society. So yes and no. It's really hard. I find it almost, it doesn't help to try and define the society in that way, but yeah, there's definitely something to that for sure. To what extent, I'm not convinced.
So if we move on to the league a little bit now, from the national team, the Serie turned fully professional, I think, about 3 years ago. I think the 22 season was when it was. So what tangible or noticeable changes have you observed, maybe in terms of player development, club investment, and the overall standard of play?
We both went at the same time. All I was going to say is that I do sort of feel like in terms of like, as you sit and watch the game, I'm not sure there's anything too tangible right now. I don't feel like the level has drastically changed. I guess it has, in the sense that the teams at the very, very bottom of the table there is a big gulf still between what they can do and what the team at the top can do. But it's maybe not quite as stark as it was 4 years ago. But it's more for the players. It's the stuff we can't see. It's the the pensions, the healthcare, the maternity leave. It's all that sort of minimum salary, all that sort of stuff, which you don't see on telly as you watch the game. Obviously, that's the sort of most important and most tangible. It's not tangible. The most important thing that you can see, and also simply the respect of that. This is the top flight of women's football in Italy, a country that, if you ask people to name 5 countries they associate with football, Italy will almost certainly be in there. It's simply just respect that they are professional athletes at what they do.
I think also with Italy becoming the Serie becoming professional, I think they became the first female professional athletes in all of Italy. So that is the respect thing is a huge aspect of it. I think it makes clubs accountable. They have to pay players. They have to give some kind of stability to players. There's a lot of horror stories that still happen in the lower leagues that aren't professional, but have happened across the top flight over the last few years that just are inhumane and crazy, and you can't believe that that's even associated to football and football players and football clubs. But I think the biggest problem that we have with the professionalism are the clubs that are not affiliated to men's clubs. So this season we had Napoli and we had Como, who are unaffiliated to men's team. Como did quite well. They've got some good investment. They've got good backing. Napoli not so much, but they managed to somehow survive. But there's a lot of clubs, Conor will be able to talk about it a lot better than me, that have died off because they can't offer the same as other professional teams can now. Which is a good thing because it means that the clubs that do come up have to treat their players with the right level of decency. But to those smaller clubs and the fans and the players who do play for those clubs, it's not ideal.
No, I think one of the best things that's happened since professionalism in Italy was the fact that we lost Pomigliano, because Pomigliano were doing things that for legal reasons I'm not going to talk about here, but they were just doing things that were quite simply illegal, and Mia used the word inhumane. It was incredible, some of the things that were happening there for a long time, and thankfully they're gone. Another club who were not operating in the most professional sense, despite being linked to a men's team, were Sampdoria. And again, they're just a mess across the board with their men's and women's side. So it's a good thing that we've seen them relegated. And the point of this is that professionalism has filtered out those teams. And I think next year is going to be a real test of what professionalism has brought to the Italian women's game, because we, at the same time as introducing professionalism, we made the league smaller from 12 to 10 teams. So that meant, by the nature of that, there were 2 less terrible teams in the league. Like there was a point a few years ago where you had like San Marino Academy, Pink Sport Bari, and another one just losing 6-7-0 every week. That's not great for the league. But what encourages me next year, as we go back to 12 teams instead of 10, is the 3 teams who've come up. So we've got Ternano coming up as champions. The fact that they've won the league over Parma says just how seriously they're taking things, because Parma are like a model for women's football clubs to follow here. And Genoa came up. Bologna narrowly missed out, but we could include Bologna in this group of Serie B teams who have been treating their women's teams as well as they treat their men's teams. They've been investing properly. They've been giving the women facilities that are worthwhile to train on and play in. And they actually care. A lot of the time we've seen teams up in the Premier Division, or in Serie A rather, who don't care about the women's teams. Like Milan for a long time have just been getting away with it because they're a big club on paper. But the fact that these clubs are coming up, the fact that it's those 3 clubs, and you could have said the same if it was Bologna instead of Genoa as the 3rd place, but the professionalism with which they've been operating in Serie B suggests that they're going to continue to do the same thing in Serie A next year. And I think if you were to ask the three of us now what we expect to happen in Serie A next year, it's for Napoli to get relegated because they can't compete with the others, because the others all just have big backing. There's always rumours that Napoli Femminile are going to unite with the Southern men's team. Whether or not that ever happens, I'm sceptical. I don't think it will, personally. But the fact that Lazio came up last year as well, and they had been investing in it, so the investment is there. I think next season will tell us a lot about professionalism in Italy. But going even deeper, it's hard to know until, forget the women, until the girls who are 14, 15, 16 now come through in first teams and they've been able to avail of professional environments through their formative years. It's going to be 10, 15 years before we really see the impact of professionalism here.
Just as a very, very quick note, even if anyone were to be excited about the prospect of Napoli joining up with the men's team, that is a men's team that, despite winning 2 of the last 3 men's Serie A titles, does not behave like a professional football club in many, many ways. And it's the sort of thing that I could imagine being a very short and unpleasant relationship if that were to actually happen.
And they did finish 10th in the other of those years, so their average performance isn't that great if you take it out, despite 2 title wins. But yeah, there are also rumours though about Napoli Femminile uniting with another southern team that isn't SSC Napoli. So that's why I was quite vague when I said uniting with a men's team, because it's not a given that it would be them, which is odd.
There's not many other options. So there's one that begins with S, but they
that takes us into another discussion, doesn't it? Because Napoli are the champions of Italy 2 of the last 3 years. One of the other best performing teams in Italian men's football over the last 10 years is Atalanta. They've won a European trophy. They've been to cup finals. Neither of them have women's teams, and that's quite a serious thing. Atalanta tried to unite with a local team, Mozzanica, a few years ago. It lasted a year, and then they pulled the plug. Their argument is that they're investing in the youth academies and they're going to organically take their place in Serie A when their youth kids get old enough to have a first team. But I think you could probably do the two. I think it's criminal for any team who's good enough on the men's level to be playing in European football and who's good enough to be playing in the top flight of their respective country to not have a women's team. For Napoli to not have a women's team despite being the Italian champions to it, I think it's scandalous. I think there should probably be punishments being handed down from the FIGC, but then that probably shows you that a lot of elements of the FIGC, the federation, don't really care about the development of women's football. So for every positive that we could name, there's probably a negative on the other side of the coin, which is heavier than the positive, unfortunately.
It's like they say, right? Like, the roots are not that strong, right? Like, when the roots are not that strong, you can have a lot of positive, good stories, but sometimes Italian football is also very notorious for being, let's say, not on the straight and narrow at times, especially with a lot of different controversies they've had over the years as well. I just wanted to ask one thing. This is a very small, minor question. Is the Genoa-Sampdoria rivalry as big on the women's side as it is on the men's side?
The answer is we don't know, because they just don't play each other. Because Genoa have been working their way up through Serie C and Serie B, and now Samp were in Serie A Samp have only existed for 4 years, Euan, since they bought Florentia's place?
Yeah, it was while we were covering.
So Samp just went straight into Serie A, and the year Samp got relegated to Serie B, Genoa have come up. So they've passed each other. So we don't know is the answer.
It's like passing ships in a sea, the sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's a very recent event which happened. So when Alia Guagni, sorry if I'm butchering the name by the way, she was Como's captain and she was one of Italy's most decorated players. So she had that misfortune, or unfortunately, she had to put her CV or resume on her jersey in her final match. And it sparked a lot of debate, not just nationally, but internationally as well, about life after football, especially for women. So what do you make of her statement and how it can accelerate the structural support for retiring players?
I think, less specifically about exactly what she has done, but the fact that it's a space where she as a player is able to do this and make this point, and there aren't, from what I could gather, any serious negative ramifications for her, like being fined wages or anything, or being punished in some way by the league for making a statement, is a positive thing. But then the fact that she felt the need to make it is not a positive thing. But yeah, it was interesting and it was different. I can't recall seeing anything like that happen before, where it's quite as obvious as on the front of your shirt. So yeah, it was quite an interesting idea, and like I said, it did make us all think a bit more about what she's going to do afterwards.
I think England do it really well with women's football players, and a lot of clubs now draft in kind of coaching elements so players can learn how to be coaches, so when they retire they can go straight into coaching, and there's a lot of like post-playing pathways that are introduced to them during their career so they can leave and have something behind them. And I think it's tough with Italy, and I think it's only really recently that maybe people have started to switch on to Italy a bit more. And this statement is massive. And again, because she played at Como, and because Como have had this big rebrand and these elaborate owners who have changed literally everything about it, made it brand new, made it a brand. That was their idea, to make it a world-class luxury brand that also plays football. Eyes are drawn to it immediately. So she had that behind her, which is good, because I've seen so many different outlets and platforms on Instagram and accounts on Instagram that have shown it. But I think maybe potentially now Italy need to start thinking, okay, maybe we should set these women up with some kind of post pathway ideas of what they want to do, because I can only imagine, I think Guanyi's 37 or 38. If you've played football since then and you have nothing else behind you and you're starting fresh at nearly 40, that is a really, really terrifying prospect. So it's a really good thing to highlight. But yeah, I think there's quite a simple answer. But whether Italy will do it, whether the FIGC will do it, is a different point in itself.
I think that the professionalism thing comes into that, doesn't it? Because with all of the, oh god, I can't even think of the word, but they're basically being given, Euan, can you help me here, because I've completely forgotten the word. When they retire, there's money in the bank for them. Why can't I think?
A pension?
There you go. They've all got pensions now because of the professionalism of the game. But as well, to give credit to DAZN's coverage has been very good. I'm not very happy as someone in Italy with the placement of the women's Serie A matches. When you have to go into the DAZN app and find them, it can be a bit tricky. I think that could improve. But with increased exposure should come increased familiarity. And for example, when Amazon here have an Italian men's team playing in the Champions League, Cristiano Girelli is almost always one of the pundits on it. So things like that are starting to happen. So you would hope the increased exposure of women's players will lead to people being more aware of who they are, and then that will lead to people being less opposed to them talking about football on television, and people won't be saying the stupid things like they've just got a token woman in. No, because Cristiano Girelli you can't say that about, because she's one of the most successful Italian footballers of all time, and I'm talking about men's and women's football together there. So when you have CVs like that, it's hard to argue with it. And Girelli, I think, in the way that we see her now as a footballer, as a trailblazer, as someone who carved out a path for other people to follow, I think we'll probably be talking about her in an off-field sense in the same way come 5-10 years, because she's doing things now that I would imagine the likes of Manuela Giuliano will go on to do in her post-playing career. Giada Greggi will have the chance to do in her post-playing career. So we're at that very funny point where we're talking about things now that we just don't know about yet, because Italy's still at those very early stages. The fact that it's at those very early stages is where we can criticize Italy. But I think, if I'm going to be optimistic, things are moving in the right direction. And the Guanyi statement is coming at a good time, because people's awareness is at an all-time high, despite it not being high enough. So I think it's going to help with the path that we are going down.
Yeah. If we bring back the focus a little bit, this question's been eating me all ever since the incident occurred. We know Dragoni picked up that ankle knock against, I think, Inter, was it? And she's had to undergo surgery, and we know she'll be missing out on the Euros. Who do you think would be another youngster in this team who people should watch out for in the Euros?
The Dragoni thing is a shame. I don't know that it necessarily hugely alters what Son Chin may have been planning from a starting lineup perspective, but she's certainly an option he would far rather have had than not had. In terms of other midfield, well, at Juve, they're not necessarily the same type of player, but a midfielder you can pop in. Eva Schatzer has had a fantastic season, and I think would be ready to play more than just 10 minutes off the bench for Italy in this tournament. She's a bit more experienced, but Emma Severini has played very well as well and can do what she does in that midfield. But yeah, I think Giulia Dragoni at Roma this season has had some good moments, but she's not really done quite what I thought she might do, which is maybe more symptomatic of how Roma have played rather than her specifically. But I think maybe 8 months ago, if you'd said to me Dragoni's going to get injured just before the Euros, I'd have thought that was a far bigger deal than it actually feels right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad you've mentioned Schatzer and Severini, because both of them, I think Severini's only like 20, 21 as well, isn't she? Schatzer's a child, but both of them play like they're 28, 29. It's unbelievable. Schatzer's got a hairstyle that makes her look like she's in her 40s as well, so it doesn't help. But like both of them play with an incredible experience, but as well, neither of them are that eye-catching. Like both of them become eye-catching when you realize how young they are. But in terms of young players who can do something that gets you off your seat, someone that I've been banging on about for probably 4 years now, Euan, is Chiara Beccari, because she went back to Juventus this season and had a really good year despite not scoring as many goals as she would have liked. And she's a forward, but mostly plays a little bit wider than a central attacking role. And what I love about her is she just goes at you. She puts her head down and she runs. She runs and she runs and she runs. She's rapid. She creates more chances than anybody. She's got an incredible level of assists, like an incredible capability to create assists, whether it's from picking a pass or just causing chaos by being as direct as she is. And she's one of the players that I enjoy watching the most. And we're talking about Italy, so I think we could probably say that 25 is young, and by that logic talk about Sofia Cantore, because she's just had the year of her life. She's probably going to leave Juventus this summer, which is heartbreaking. But everything I've said about Beccari is also true of Cantore, but Cantore scores way more goals than Beccari. So I think the players to watch are definitely going to be Cantore as a guarantee, and Beccari still has kind of like an outside chance to really light things up this summer.
And just to add, when we're looking at the midfield for Italy, because that's where Dragoni would have been playing, you don't have to look past Ariana Caruso and Manuela Giuliano. Together, two fantastic players, complement each other so well in the national team. We've had conversations about Caruso left in January to go to Bayern Munich. We questioned that decision at the time. We still question that decision. She hasn't played an awful lot, and she would have known that Euros is coming. So it's been a really interesting watch to see why she chose to do that. But pre-January, she had a fantastic season. She was captain of Juve at the time, stand-in for Saragama, and she's going to be fantastic. I always panic with when players don't play. And you think, why, they're just wasting their time. They're not getting their minutes up. And Caruso in the last international break, I was very worried because the first game was Sweden, and she didn't have a very good first half, and I thought, this is going to be, if she's not firing for the Euros, Italy are going to struggle, because she and Giuliano are two of their key players that make the sides tick. She come out after that second half and was fantastic, and then played against Denmark, was fantastic. She is going to be sensational, and as much as Dragoni will be missed, it's very, very lucky that it's not Caruso and it's not Giuliano that have had that injury, because that would have been probably, this might sound dramatic, but tournament over, as far as I'm concerned.
I wouldn't start Caruso in the first game of the tournament.
I knew you was going to say that. Can you mute him? Is there any way you can mute him now?
Ariana Caruso has been one of my favourite players for as long as I've been following Italian women's football. And the track record is there. Like, you can search my name and her name on Instagram or Twitter, whatever. You'll see that she hasn't played since January. Emma Severini's been brilliant for 2 years now. Eva Schatzer's been brilliant for 2 years now. Manuela Giuliano's probably the first name on the team sheet, and she's someone that I've always had my doubts about. If any of those don't start because someone who hasn't kicked the ball in 6 months is there on reputation, I think that's scandalous. Like, who are you dropping, Mia? If you have to take out either Schatzer or Severini.
I'm not starting Eva Schatzer. We've had this conversation before. I would start Caruso based on those two, that game and a half that she played last international break. I'd play Ariana Caruso. Also, given the fact that she has experience in major tournaments. Schatzer is a fantastic replacement.
Experience of what? I don't know if we could. Experience of shitting the bed. She hasn't done anything in a major tournament. She's been dreadful. I love her. She hasn't done a single thing in a major tournament for Italy. Her experience is disastrous. She will start. I agree. I think it'll be ridiculous to start her though. Unless, look, we've got 2 games. We've got Sweden and Wales. If she plays in those games and plays excellently, fine.
She will.
She's not fit at the moment, though, is she? Because she doesn't play, and she's picked up an injury, and no one notices that she's injured because she doesn't play anyway. I think the move's been a disaster. I think it will be a success long term, but I think for now, at this point, it's been a disaster. And I think she will start. I think she'll start all 3 of Italy's games, and I think she'll do well because she's an excellent footballer. But I don't think she deserves to start, unfortunately, because Schatzer's brilliant. Eva Schatzer is brilliant, and Emma Severini's undroppable. In a world where Giada Greggi and Giulia Dragoni are out, because if it were me and everybody was fit, the starting 3 is Greggi, Giuliano, and Caruso. But given the circumstances that we're in, I think it has to be Giuliano, Severini, and Schatzer.
Like, I think we'll be sitting here debating about that for a long time. Like, I think it is their very drastic selection calls which Sonchin will have to take. I think we need to end with this final question. Like, the Women's World Cup is expanding to 48 teams. So what do you think about it from a very broad global perspective, especially for the teams which are not as fortunate to have like professional teams?
I mean, it's difficult expanding tournaments because more and more federations are taking the women's game more seriously, and therefore more teams are getting better. And you could say, well, yeah, you want to open up these tournaments to more teams. 48 is it's a lot of teams, and it just gets to a point where I wonder if when that begins, you could be as interested as you want. You could find yourself not having a clue what's going on because it's so much football. Given it's going to have to be really compact, you have to have a lot of games happening at the same time. And I just think there is a sweet spot with these things, and I think it's quite far beneath 48. If I'm being honest,
I think it's a terrible decision because of the perception of women's football. Like, a lot of the things that people who don't watch women's football say about women's football are there's no competition, etc., etc. there will be a lot of disparity between 48 teams at a men's World Cup. At a women's World Cup, it's going to be even further exaggerated. Like, at a 48-team women's World Cup, there will be games that end 10-0. There will be games that finish 11-12-0. And that is not what anybody wants to see, because how do you sell that to anybody? Like, you can't. And I think it's coming too soon. The fact that they're rushing to do it with the men's thing and they want to seem like they're taking the women's thing as equally, I think it's forced their own hand in a way, but I think it's a huge mistake.
The other thing is that if one of the fears with this is how it's perceived by the public, which has to be one of the fears, that idea of there's too many teams, some of them are rubbish, that is a school of thought that is already fully in existence in the men's game. Obviously, they expanded the Euros, and it meant that, you know, even at the most recent men's Euros, there were some pretty poor teams in there. And they're expanding the men's World Cup, and you have the same situation where, you know, you can look at it from a fan perspective and go, well, this team never really has a sniff of getting to these tournaments, and now their fans get to go and experience it, and that is obviously lovely, and we all like that. But it's a school of thought that already exists for the men's game. So when people flick this on and see a very small country, like Conor says, getting absolutely whacked by another country that might not even actually be that great themselves, but there's that level of disparity, I think it will be perceived by a lot of people as a bit of a joke, which I just think it's the direction everything's going in, is expanding these tournaments, but it seems like a very, even though it's 6 years away, it still seems quite quick to go to that level of team.
I will say, as a positive, because I'm going to be positive about it, that I think the idea is, in women's football at the minute, and it has been for the last few years, is inspiring the next generation. Doesn't matter how that is. We saw it with Haiti last year. Was it Haiti? Yeah, last 2023 World Cup. And they lost. They lost every game. They lost. But the nation clubbed together. It didn't matter that they were losing. The Haitian players were on the world stage. It gave young girls something to look up to, and even though they were losing, it's the fact that they are there. They're playing against the best players in the world, and it's an option for that. It's an opportunity for them to be there. So I think, as much as the two boys they're absolutely right, and visually it's going to be awful for a neutral or someone who is maybe coming over from the men's football to look at the women's football. It's going to be an awful watch, genuinely. But the bigger picture to me is the opportunities are going to improve, the dreams are going to be there for the young girls, and it won't be too long before these nations start pumping a bit more money into these teams. They've reached the World Cup. They probably won't want to do it again, and they're just going to keep improving. They're just going to keep improving, and I think that's the big thing. That's the number one thing for them.
Well, I do completely agree that level of inspiring more people and getting it to more and more countries, more even continents that don't routinely get teams at these tournaments. I do think you can cheapen the achievement by having so many people, because you can get to a point where it's not actually all that hard anymore to get into the tournament, and therefore you can water it down and it kind of becomes less inspirational. I think, yeah, there isn't an exact right answer. I just, like I say, I just think that that's a big jump team-wise.
The jump is huge, and then that also works the other way as well, because I remember when the men's Euros expanded in 2016 and Ireland got there, everyone was like, oh, but we're only there because it's expanded. And it does cheapen the whole being there part of it. And one of my best ever memories, not just about football, but in my life, came from going to that when Ireland beat Italy to go through. Like, it was one of the best days I've ever had in my life. But then after that, Ireland haven't even qualified for the expanded tournament. So you're thinking, oh, if we can't even qualify for the expanded tournaments, you end up almost defeating what you're trying to do, because then people go through phases of not caring because we can't even qualify for something that's bigger. So I get it, and I do massively appreciate the fact that football is about inspiring generations. Football, when it's at its best, taps into inspiration and human stories. But I'm concerned by the size of the jump, as Euan was getting to as well. And I'm contractually obliged to disagree with anything Mia says as well, so it has to be done.
Yeah, no, I think so far the guests that we've had on and we've posed this question to them, I think I think generally in the women's football world, the opinion has been the same, that there are some positives, but not enough to overshadow the negatives that will come with this expansion. And I think all that's left is to see what effect this is going to have ultimately after the 2031 World Cup ends, and we see how it affects the smaller nations, and whether it actually reduces the gap or it increases this further. So, a last question. I know we've touched upon this a lot, but can each of you just give us a prediction or a position where you think Italy will finish in the
No.
Euros?
No. Mia, go first.
I'm going to be really optimistic. Sometimes I feel like they're not going to do too well and they won't reach the group stages, and other times I'm like, they're going to reach the final. I'm going to say quarterfinals, and they'll get knocked out in the quarterfinals.
A doubt's come into my mind now. Is that the first knockout round, or is there a last 16?
Second, yes,
Okay.
the last 16.
I say last 16. No, don't shake your head, because I wanted to say group stage, but I'm trying to be more optimistic. I just have no faith in Italy at a tournament because I've been scarred by the last two. Mia, you're lucky in that you weren't around in the 2022 Euros to experience it as an Italy fan. And you were still very wet behind the ears as an Italy fan in 2023, but Burnsy and I are a bit more beaten down by this group of players.
Yeah, I must say, round of 16 was the furthest I was willing to take it in terms of forcing optimism. I think getting out of the group is plausible, and I think the way that Italy have played fairly recently under Sonchin does lend itself to getting out of a group. But I don't think it gets you any further. I think when push comes to shove, I think they're not quite good enough.
I'm going to say something crazy, right? Stick with me, guys. Mia, I think I'll win you back with this. Something that defines Italian football is that national teams do their best when nobody expects them to. I think expectations of the Italy women's national team have never been lower before a tournament than they are this summer. That was comparable with the men's team at Euro 2020. What happened then? They won it. Mia, Italy are going to win the Euros this summer. They're going to win the Euros. Let's say it. Come on.
Fine.
Caruso's going to score the winner in the final.
Sold.
Of a Nadine Nischler assist. There you go. They're going to win it.
I think your prediction, Connor, has just summed up this entire podcast.
What, just chaos? Just saying anything that comes to mind?
Chaos, yeah. It was
From I think starting with Sonchin's call-ups and the nature of the performance of the Italian team in the tournaments. So I think we'll end on this very brave note. And this has been a really good podcast. We've gotten insights from a lot of different aspects, on field, off field as well. I think it was quite a well-rounded one, and we definitely had enjoyed having all three of you on and making this a proper conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and let's hope Italy does do well.
Come on, say it.
Yeah.
Let's hope Italy wins.
Let's hope they win.
I think let's hope Italy wins. Yeah.
There you go. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and giving your valuable time.